At the heart of your work as an SEO are Google's Webmaster Guidelines. Now, we're talking about Google because it's the primary search engine that we're targeting. Of course, we could deal with Bing and Yahoo and some other search engines, but really the main one is Google. So we're looking at Google's Webmaster Guidelines. Now, Google's Webmaster Guidelines apply to both on-page SEO and off-page SEO. This is going to be the culmination of all the work that you're going to be doing. What's great about Google's Webmaster Guidelines is that it helps to outline what you should and should not do, and it's coming directly from the search giant itself. But this isn't the 200 plus ranking factors that we're going to discuss later. Now, Google discusses these Webmaster Guidelines, but it doesn't discuss the ranking factors, the 200 plus ranking factors that exist in the new Hummingbird search. And we're going to discuss that later in this course. For now, we want to focus on what Google is telling us to do specifically and telling us what not to do as well. We can find Google's Webmaster Guidelines by either Googling Webmaster Guidelines. We get to this page after we do the search. We just click on the first one. We get to this page and we see that it's broken out into 3 different sections. Now, there's the design and content guidelines, the technical guidelines, and the quality guidelines. Now, Google specifically states that even if you don't implement many of these, that you should pay very close attention to the quality guidelines. The quality guidelines have a lot to do with the illicit practices that some of the black hat SEOs have become known to be doing, and these can result in removal from their index entirely or demotion on the ranks on the SERPs. So you don't want to engage in that stuff, so we're going to stay away from those things. Now, I do want you to pay special attention to each of these sections, and I want you to try to implement as much of this as possible. So, and understanding this in the beginning at the outset is really, really important because you'll construct your work from these fundamental understandings. So we have to kind of understand, break these down, and see where we're going with it. Now, we'll go through these one by one, and we can take a look at and see, and we'll have a brief discussion about each of them. I'll kind of outline them. In the resource, you'll find a downloadable document, which I've condensed these into a bit more of a understandable summarized version where things make a little bit more sense. But we'll go through and read off what Google has on their Webmaster Guidelines for now, and you can download the resource after you're finished with watching this video. So for the design and content guidelines, first thing they say is that they want you to make a site that has a clear hierarchy with text links. Every page should be reachable from at least one static text link. So what does that mean? The navigational elements have to be pretty clear and understandable. You want to stay away from doing too many images, like image-heavy navigations. Now, all that stuff used to be pretty popular back in the day. I don't know if you have any experience with the web back then when images were very, very popular and HTML was built with tables as opposed to CSS. But today with CSS, you can pretty much achieve everything that you can do with images, so it's really not necessary. You can do drop shadows, you can do all sorts of cool outlines and stuff with CSS. So your website links, navigation elements should be clear and understandable, and people should be able to click them and get to every major section of your site very, very easily. Next thing is that they want you to offer a sitemap. So there's 2 different ways to do this. There will be an XML sitemap, which you'll need to upload to your server, and you also want to upload a sitemap, an HTML sitemap, especially if you have a pretty big website. But a sitemap is good to have regardless. You want to show the major sections on your site, especially if you have a really big website. Now, they're saying that if you have a really big website, they want you to break it out into multiple pages. So you should try to give people kind of a hierarchy of what you're presenting in that sitemap. So that's pretty important. You want to have that there. You're not gonna lose a ton of rank if you don't have a sitemap, but it's good practice. And if since you have control over this, then you should definitely implement it. Later on, I discuss a tool that you can use to generate an XML sitemap. Keep the links on a given page to a reasonable number. So what they're trying to say is, don't have hundreds of links on a page. don't try to link out to every single place. And now that's kind of what the content farms, link farms, etc. of back in the day used to try to do. So keep the links to a reasonable number. And they want you to create a useful, information-rich site. They want you to write good content, basically. So that's pretty straightforward. But not everybody does it, of course. And then they say they want you to think about the words that users would use to find your pages. So they want you to develop keyword-centric content. Don't try to write content that kind of goes off in tangents and doesn't really stay on track. Write something that's very keyword-centric so that Google knows exactly what this piece of content is about. The next thing that they say here is to try to use text instead of images to display important names, contents, or links. The Google crawler can't understand or recognize images, text inside of images. At least right now they can't. I know that they're working on some cool AI stuff, but currently they can't. So, and when you do have images, you want to use the alt attribute to detail what that image is about. So, try to ensure that you use that. That's a best practice. Now, when you're developing content and you're putting an image on the page, you're going to want to, and we'll discuss this a little bit later when we get to that section, you're going to want to ensure that your keyword is in the alt attribute. But also what I'll discuss later is I would suggest naming the image using hyphens to separate the breaks, the same name as the keyword of the page or the title of the page. We'll discuss all that stuff later. For now, this is kind of a brief overview. Make sure that your title elements and alt attributes are descriptive and accurate. Again, so that's the alternative attributes. Now, the title element would be, the title of the page. So we're going to want to make sure that correlates to whatever content we're discussing, and that there's proper keyword usage in there as well. We want to check for broken links and correct HTML. We don't want to have links that are broken on our website. We also don't want to have HTML that looks weird or funny or cross-browser issues and stuff like that. Next thing is if you use dynamic pages. Now, as you can see actually on this page here, you can see the question mark. This means that this is a dynamic page, HL equals EN. So you want to ensure that if you're using dynamic pages, that you don't have more than one variable. For example, this could also extend into something that has, an ampersand after it and some other variables and another ampersand and other variables. So that's kind of more of the geeky programming stuff. But you don't want to have pages that have too many variables after them. You want to stick to one. I would stick to none if you can have any control over it. If you're using WordPress, just turn on the permalinks post name attribute, and you won't have any of these kinds of things. They want you to review the best practices for images, video, and rich snippets. We'll discuss that. Now going into the technical guidelines. Now these are more of kind of the underlying code related stuff that relates to your website. The first one talks about to help Google fully understand your site's contents, allow all of your site's assets such as CSS and JavaScript to be crawled. So they really want to be able to crawl everything on your site so that they can render how your site looks like to other people, to the Google search engine. They want to be able to test it out and see what it looks like. So what this is basically saying is they want you to have crawlable pages. For most people, they don't need to worry too much about this. They're gonna create crawlable websites, but you have to be careful, especially if you're using a lot of password related stuff or htaccess stuff, that everything can be crawled properly. And you want to allow the Google search bots to crawl without using session IDs. Now this is more of an advanced thing. If you're not kind of developing a high-end e-commerce website or something like that, you don't have to worry too much about this. But if you are using session IDs, you just want to ensure that if somebody's a spider or a bot is hitting the website, that they can still crawl it and see what they would see. Again, the next one is kind of something that you don't have to worry too much about. It's general practice, or it's pretty standard that most web servers will support the if modified since HTTP header. Basically, that allows Google to find out, if the content changed since the last time they crawled it. So this will save you some bandwidth and overhead. Make use of the robots.txt file on your web server, basically telling Google what they can, or other crawlers what they can and cannot view, and we discuss this a little bit more later. Then they want you to make reasonable efforts to ensure that advertisements don't affect search engine rankings. For example, Google's AdSense ads and double-click links are blocked from being crawled by a robots.txt file. So they want you to kind of ensure that you use best practices when it comes to that. If you're using a content management system, make sure that the system creates pages and links that search engines can crawl. If you're using WordPress, you don't have to worry about that. Again, the next one relates to robots.txt, which we discuss later. Test your site to make sure it appears correctly in different browsers. So you want cross-browser compatibility. This is pretty obvious. Mobile tablets are on the rise right now. They're a big source of traffic for many different websites. You don't want it to look all messed up on mobile and tablets and look perfect on desktop. And the next one is a pretty important one, actually. Monitor your site's performance and optimize load times. The page speed is really important, because if people are waiting too long, 2, 3, 4 seconds, then they can get pretty frustrated and maybe not even get to your website, or abandon it if they're trying to browse around and things are taking too long to load. So you have to kind of do some research into that and ensure things are loading pretty quickly. This has a lot to do with your web server, and also what you're running, what types of, if you're using WordPress, what types of plugins you have. For example, WordFence, which is an anti-hacking kind of plugin, will slow things down a little bit. It is a great plugin to use, and I definitely recommend it, but it slows things down. So you have to ensure that whatever extra plugins and stuff that you have going on, that the website still is working properly and is working quickly. The quality guidelines are really, really important. Later on, we discuss a lot of techniques and stuff that we will pay homage to these quality guidelines with, because everything that we do, again, we're forging value and building trust. We have to ensure that we do it above board. So the basic principles that they first talk about with the quality guidelines are to make pages for users and not search engines. That has to do with cloaking. They don't want you to try to present one thing to the search engines and another thing to users. Don't deceive your users. Don't try to redirect them and send them off to someplace else after they arrive. Just basically, don't try to trick people. If you, and they say here, a good rule of thumb is whether you feel comfortable explaining what you've done to a website that competes with you, or to a Google employee. So you have to ask yourself, does this help my users? What would I do this if search engines didn't exist, etc. Think about ways you can make unique, valuable, or engaging content, because your website really has to do just that. That's the forging value and building trust. You want unique content that's well written, that's well researched, and it's engaging. People get there and they want to read it, and they want to finish reading it, and they want to tell friends about it even. Obviously, they want to share it. So we really have to focus on that. So that's why these fundamentals are so important. I want you to kind of drill these into your mind as you move forward. So the specific guidelines they have here are, you want to avoid certain things. Now, these things that they're talking about relate to a lot of the black hat SEO that was going on, that forced their hand when they did these major algorithm adjustments, the Panda Penguin and et cetera. They don't want you to automatically generate content, spinning content. They used to be kind of something pretty popular. Obviously, it's not done anymore. They don't want you to participate in link schemes, and we'll talk about link schemes pretty heavily a little bit later. Basically, link schemes are, if you get out there and you generate thousands and thousands of links back to your website by using software programs or some scraping system, or enlisting somebody else to help do that for you. They want you to create pages with they want you to avoid creating pages with little or no original content. So don't try to duplicate content. That's a huge no-no. And don't do thin content. You have to keep your content over at least 1,000 words. Now, one study showed that most of the first page Google search results are actually over 2,000 words, ranking at around 2,200 words. So I generally go for at least 2,000 words when I'm writing content, but I would definitely never ever try to go below 1,000 words. It doesn't really matter what anybody else tells you. You want content that's long enough, but you also don't want it to sound forced and spammy and stuff like that. You just want to develop really, really good content. That's long enough, and it's not short, and it's not going to gyp people. So they want you to stay away from cloaking, sneaky redirects, hidden text or links. Hidden text is when you try to hide keywords or links inside of the HTML by making the link the same color as the background. For example, like if these links were in white and you couldn't see them, that would be a hidden text or link. Don't do that. Doorway pages, those redirects or the cloaking that kind of sends people off to other places. Scraping content, again, this is kind of like duplicating it. They don't want you to participate in affiliate programs without adding enough value. Now, they're not saying don't participate in affiliate programs. They're just saying that if you are engaging in affiliate programs, make sure that you are still delivering high value content to people, even if you have some affiliate ads in there. Don't try to bombard people with affiliate stuff. They don't want you to put irrelevant keywords on the page. Now, this is important. If you're dealing with hashtags, keywords, whatever, don't try to use every single keyword under the sun. Don't try to use irrelevant ones. Stick to 5 to 7, keywords. If you're doing hashtags, for example, but don't do irrelevant keywords. Like, don't try to create keywords that make no sense, basically. They don't want you to create pages with malicious behavior, of course, phishing, installing viruses, Trojans. It's pretty obvious. Abusing rich snippet markups. We'll talk about that later. It's not something really that you'll need to worry about. You probably won't be doing that. They don't want you sending automated queries to Google. Then, they also want you to monitor your website for hacking. They want you to prevent user-generated spam, for example, comment spam, forum spam, stuff like that if you're running a forum or if you're getting a lot of comments on your posts and stuff like that. So, if you do end up violating some of this, Google, could take action against you. Could be automated action, could be manual action. And, if you do, end up, suffering penalties, you could submit your site for reconsideration after you change things. But then again, you don't want to be in that situation. You don't want to end up in Google's sandbox. You don't want to end up on Google's bad side. So keep these in mind, and you can download the resource once you've completed this video. Just want you to ensure that you stick with these Webmaster guidelines and try to follow these as much as you can when you're doing anything on your website. Basically you should keep that forging value and building trust in mind. Always ask yourself, am I forging value and building trust by doing this, or am I not, or am I trying to deceive? So that's really, really important to keep in the back of your mind always.